In a quiet December afternoon in 1972, a 7-year-old boy vanished from the streets of Merced, California. This innocent child, Steven Stayner, was thrust into a 7-year nightmare that would test his courage and resilience beyond imagination. Welcome to Chilling Fireside Stories, where we delve into true stories that reveal the strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. As always, viewer discretion is advised. This story contains details that some may find distressing. As always, stay until the end of this video for relevant images to deepen your understanding of the case and safety tips and resources to help protect vulnerable individuals. Now grab a warm drink, settle in, and let's begin. Steven Stayner was born on April 18, 1965, in Merced, California, to Delbert and Kay Stayner. He was the third of 5 children, growing up with 3 sisters and an older brother, Carrie. The family lived a modest life in a small house, with Delbert working long hours to provide for them. Steven's childhood was typical of the time. He loved riding bikes with friends and playing outside. Described as friendly and outgoing, Steven's happy-go-lucky demeanor made him well-liked in his community. However, on December 4, 1972, 7-year-old Steven Stayner's life changed forever. Steven was walking home from school in Merced, California, when he was approached by a man named Irvin Edward Murphy. Murphy, who had been enlisted by convicted child molester Kenneth Parnell, asked Steven if his mother would be willing to donate items to the church. Steven agreed to show Murphy where he lived. As they walked, a white Buick driven by Parnell pulled up. Steven willingly got into the car with Murphy, believing they were going to his home. Instead, Parnell drove Steven and Murphy to his cabin in Cathy's Valley, located just a few hundred feet from Steven's maternal grandfather's residence. Irvin Edward Murphy worked as a dishwasher at the Yosemite Lodge, where he met Kenneth Parnell, a convicted child molester. Parnell convinced Murphy that he was an aspiring minister and needed help with a religious mission. Murphy believed Parnell was a minister and was unaware of Parnell's true intentions. Murphy had no idea of Parnell's true intentions and believed he was helping Parnell with a religious mission. Once they arrived at the cabin, Parnell sent Murphy on an errand, claiming he needed supplies. This was a tactic to isolate Steven and begin the process of abducting him. That night, Parnell molested Steven, and 13 days later he began raping him. Parnell told Steven that his parents no longer wanted him and that he had been granted legal custody. Parnell renamed Steven Dennis Gregory Parnell. When Steven didn't return home from school, his parents, Delbert and Kay Stayner, became worried. They initially assumed he might have been delayed or gone to a friend's house. As evening approached and there was still no sign of Steven, his family panicked. They began searching the neighborhood, calling friends and neighbors, hoping for any information about his whereabouts. The Stayners contacted the police, who began an investigation into Steven's disappearance. Flyers were distributed and the community rallied together, searching for Steven. The family made public appeals, desperately hoping for his safe return. The Stayner family received overwhelming support from their community in Merced. Neighbors, friends, and strangers helped in the search efforts, putting up posters and spreading the word about Steven's disappearance. Steven's abduction gained significant media attention, both locally and nationally. News outlets covered the story extensively, amplifying the family's pleas for help and increasing public awareness about the case. Despite these efforts, weeks turned into months, and months turned into years with no leads, leaving the Stayner family in a state of prolonged heartache and uncertainty. Under the name Dennis Parnell, Steven lived a life of isolation and abuse. Parnell moved him frequently across California to avoid detection. He introduced Steven Stayner as his son. Initially, Steven lived with Parnell in the cabin in Cathy's Valley. He attended local schools under his new identity. Over the next 7 years, Parnell and Steven moved frequently. They lived in several locations across California, including Santa Rosa and Campeche. Parnell manipulated Steven into believing that his family didn't want him anymore. He subjected Steven to continuous sexual abuse and psychological manipulation. Steven attended multiple schools, including Steel Lane Elementary in Santa Rosa. Despite the frequent moves, Steven managed to attend school sporadically, maintaining his new identity as Dennis Parnell. Parnell used forged or falsified documents to support the claim that Dennis Parnell was his son and that he had legal custody. These documents were often enough to satisfy school administrators. The constant moving from one place to another helped avoid any extended scrutiny. Each time they moved, Parnell would enroll Steven in a new school, which prevented anyone from noticing inconsistencies over time. Despite the abuse, Steven tried to live a semblance of a normal life. He attended school, made friends, and participated in activities, all while hiding his true identity and the horrors he was enduring at home. Some of Steven's friends and classmates noticed that he seemed different from other children. He was often quiet and reserved, and there were times when he appeared anxious or withdrawn. However, these signs were not enough to raise significant suspicion, as Steven was able to hide the true extent of his suffering. Teachers and school staff also noticed that Steven's attendance was irregular, and he moved schools frequently. This inconsistency in his education was a red flag, but without more concrete evidence, it was difficult for anyone to connect the dots and realize that he was a kidnapping victim. Parnell's tactics allowed him to keep Steven hidden in plain sight for 7 years, maintaining the illusion of a father-son relationship and preventing anyone from discovering the truth. In 1973, about 9 months after Steven's abduction, Kenneth Parnell met Barbara Mathias. She moved in with Parnell and Steven for about 9 months, during which time she played the role of Steven's mother and participated in the abuse and rape. Barbara later cooperated with authorities during Parnell's trials, and she reportedly had no prior knowledge of Steven's true identity. After Steven's escape, she met Steven's real parents and expressed her sympathy for the ordeal they had gone through. On February 13, 1980, when Steven was 14 years old, Kenneth Parnell kidnapped another child, 5-year-old Timothy White. Parnell enlisted the help of a local teenager named Sean Poorman, promising him drugs and $50 cash in exchange for his assistance. Poorman noticed Timothy playing outside his parents' house in Ukiah, California, and ushered him into Parnell's getaway car. When Timothy resisted and tried to run indoors, Poorman forced him into the car. Parnell then took Timothy to his remote cabin, where he attempted to groom him, just as he had done with Steven Stayner. Parnell dyed Timothy's blonde hair dark brown to change his appearance and began calling him Tommy. During the 16 days Timothy was held captive, he formed a bond with Steven, who was determined to prevent another child from suffering the same abuse he had endured. On the evening of March 1, 1980, Steven Stayner made a courageous decision to escape with Timothy White. Parnell had left them alone while he was away at his night security job at the Palace Hotel in Ukiah. Steven, now 14 years old, had decided he could no longer allow Timothy to suffer the same fate he had. He took it upon himself to protect Timothy and find a way to safety. Later on one of his interviews, Steven said, "I couldn't see Timmy suffer. It was my do-or-die chance, and I also would be coming home for doing something positive." Steven explained to Timothy that they needed to leave the cabin and go to the police. He reassured Timothy and instructed him on what they needed to do. While Parnell was at work, Steven seized the opportunity. He took Timothy by the hand and they left the cabin. They walked a significant distance along a remote road. After walking for a while, Steven and Timothy managed to hitch a ride with a passing truck driver. Steven told the driver that they needed to get to Ukiah. Once they arrived in Ukiah, Steven and Timothy went to the police station. Steven, understanding the importance of this moment, told Timothy to go inside and tell the officers his name. Timothy, however, got scared and ran back to Steven. The police officers noticed the two boys outside and approached them. Steven bravely revealed their true identities, explaining that he was Steven Stayner and that Timothy had been abducted by Kenneth Parnell. The police quickly verified Steven's story and contacted both the Stayner and White families. The boys were reunited with their families. Steven's parents, Delbert and Kay Stayner, were overjoyed to learn that their son was alive. They rushed to Ukiah to be reunited with him. The emotional reunion was captured by the media, and Steven's return became a national story. Steven's bravery and determination not only saved Timothy but also brought an end to his own years-long nightmare. His actions were celebrated, and he became a symbol of hope and resilience. With the information provided by Steven and Timothy, the police were able to determine Parnell's location. They found out that Parnell was living in a remote cabin in Catheys Valley, California. The police organized a search and arrest operation. They went to Parnell's cabin and arrested him on charges of kidnapping and child abuse. Steven's return home was both joyous and challenging. He had been away for 7 years and had to readjust to life with his family. His parents initially saw him as the 7-year-old boy they had lost, but Steven had grown and changed significantly during his captivity. The story of Steven's escape and rescue of Timothy White captured the nation's attention. Steven and his family were thrust into the spotlight, with media coverage and public interest in their story. Steven faced numerous challenges as he tried to reintegrate into normal life. He struggled with the trauma of his captivity and the sudden fame that came with his rescue. Despite these difficulties, Steven showed remarkable resilience and courage. Steven's bravery in rescuing Timothy White and escaping from Parnell made him a hero. His story raised awareness about child abduction and the importance of vigilance and support for victims. The trial of Kenneth Parnell was a significant event that brought Steven Stayner's story to the public eye. The trial took place in California, and Parnell faced multiple charges related to his crime. Steven was the primary witness against Parnell. He provided detailed testimony about his abduction, captivity, and the abuse he suffered. Timothy, who was abducted by Parnell after Steven, also testified about his experiences. His testimony corroborated Steven's account and added to the evidence against Parnell. Kenneth Parnell was charged with the kidnapping and sexual abuse of Steven Stayner and Timothy White. Parnell sentenced to 7 years in prison. However, he served only 5 years before being released on parole. Parnell's criminal activities didn't end there. In 2003, he was arrested again for attempting to purchase a 4-year-old boy for $500. This time, he was convicted of attempting to procure a child for sex and was sentenced to 25 years to life under California's 3 strikes law. Parnell died in prison on January 21, 2008, at the age of 76. Irvin Edward Murphy was convicted of kidnapping and served 5 years in prison for his role in Steven's abduction. His testimony was instrumental in the investigation and subsequent legal proceedings against Parnell. The case of Kenneth Parnell and the abduction of Steven Stayner and Timothy White had a significant impact on child protection laws and policies. One notable change was the strengthening of California's 3 strikes law. Under this law, repeat offenders like Parnell face much harsher penalties, including life sentences for multiple convictions. Parnell's case highlighted the need for stricter measures to protect children from repeat offenders. Additionally, the case raised awareness about the importance of child abduction prevention programs and improved law enforcement training to handle such cases more effectively. The bravery of Steven Stayner and the subsequent legal actions against Parnell contributed to a greater emphasis on child safety and the prosecution of child abductors. After Steven Stayner returned home, he faced significant challenges in readjusting to normal life. One of the most difficult aspects was dealing with bullying at school. Steven's story was highly publicized and he became a national figure. This intense media scrutiny made him a target for bullying, as other children often didn't understand the gravity of his experience. At school, Steven was frequently nagged with personal questions about his abduction and abuse. This constant probing made it difficult for him to move on and feel normal. Some children bullied Steven because of the sexual abuse he had suffered at the hands of Kenneth Parnell. This stigma added to his emotional burden and made his school life even more challenging. Unfortunately, the lack of counseling left Steven defenseless and vulnerable too. Steven did not receive adequate psychological counseling to help him cope with his trauma. This lack of support made it harder for him to deal with the bullying and the emotional aftermath of his captivity. Steven worked various jobs to support himself. He found employment at a Pizza Hut and later at a construction site. Despite these difficulties, he strived to create a stable and loving home for his family. Steven married Jody Stayner in June 1985. At the time, Steven was 20 years old and Jody was 17. Together they had 2 children, Ashley and Steven Jr. He made sure to be a good husband and father, trying to shield his family from the shadows of his past. Steven also took on a role as an advocate for child abduction awareness and prevention. He shared his story to help other children and raise awareness about the dangers of abduction. His public appearances, including television shows and interviews, brought attention to his cause and offered hope and support to other victims and their families. Tragically, Steven's life was cut short when he died in a motorcycle accident on September 16, 1989. He was only 24 years old. Approximately 500 people attended Steven Stayner's funeral. The service was held 4 days after his tragic death in a church he had joined not long before his passing. One of the pallbearers was Timothy White, who was 14 years old at the time. The inscription on Steven's casket read, "Going home." Despite his brief life, Steven Stayner left a lasting legacy through his bravery, advocacy, and the love he showed his family and community. His story continues to inspire and remind us of the resilience of the human spirit. Steven Stayner's story has inspired countless books, documentaries, and movies, including the miniseries I Know My First Name is Steven. His courage in saving Timothy White remains a powerful reminder of human resilience and the fight for justice. Timothy White also honored Steven's legacy by becoming a sheriff's deputy, dedicating his life to protecting others. Sadly, Timothy White died on April 1, 2010 from an apparent pulmonary embolism. He was 35 years old at the time of his death. Timothy was buried in Eternal Valley Memorial Park in Newhall, California. Later that year, in August 2010, a bronze statue of Steven Stayner and Timothy White titled "Coming Home" was dedicated in Applegate Park, Merced, California. The statue, created by sculptor Paula Slater, depicts nearly 15-year-old Steven leading young Timothy by the hand as they escape from their captor, Kenneth Parnell. This memorial serves as a tribute to Steven's bravery and the bond he formed with Timothy during their ordeal. The dedication ceremony was attended by family members, friends, and community members, honoring their story. The statue includes a plaque that truthfully relates what happened to Steven, aiming to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The statue stands as a symbol of hope and resilience, reminding us of the importance of child safety and the impact of their courageous actions. Steven's story underscores the importance of protecting vulnerable individuals. Teach children to identify safe adults in emergencies, such as police officers or teachers. Have a family code word that children can use to verify someone's identity. Encourage open communication so children feel comfortable discussing anything unusual. Always be alert, especially in unfamiliar settings. Use technology for safety. Equip children with devices that can track their location or call for help. You can find in the description all the necessary tips and safety apps to keep your children safe. If this story moved you, please share this video to honor Steven's legacy and raise awareness about child safety. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more stories of courage and resilience. Thank you for watching Chilling Fireside Stories. Until my next video, stay informed, stay warm, and stay safe.